Every day, we are bombarded with information from countless sources. But with so much out there, how do we know what's real and what's not? Fake news isn't just misleading, it has real consequences on how we perceive our world. In this episode, we will explore how digital technologies transformed the way we consume and produce media. By the end of this episode, you will have a way to navigate this complex landscape confidently and critically. My name is Kevin, and I have too many interests, not enough time, and a drive to understand our world better. We live in an era where information is at our fingertips 24/7. We can access opinions, news, and data all over the world just like this. But this abundance of information has made it more and more complicated to discern what is trustworthy and what is not. And everybody is talking about fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Those fake news have made it more complicated than ever to navigate this landscape of information. But it has made it even more important for each of us to try to develop a framework and an understanding of how can we discern what is real and what is not. So how did we get here, and what can we do to become better consumer and producer of information? In the beginning, internet was just like a digital library. All websites were static, and most of the users of internet were just readers. So for the majority of people, it was simply going on a website, looking at the information that was there, and logging off when you were done. The content creation part at this time was really reserved to people that had the technical knowledge and resources to actually build a website. This is what is now called Web 1.0, which is really the early beginnings of internet. But things took a turn in the last decades or so, when all the websites and the information online became interactive. This is what we now call user-generated content. And this is created on social media or forums or even blogs. All of a sudden, everybody became a writer or a content creator. Everybody could interact with internet and add its own mark on it. And this is great, right? Because this is the democratization of information, everybody can participate. But there is also some drawbacks, because at the same time we saw a rise of misinformation online. And because of the switch from Web 1.0 to Web 2.0, we have a new skill which is required to go on internet, because we need to recognize that we are all not only consumer of information, but also producer of a lot of content. And if you believe that you are not creating content, think twice, because simply commenting on a video, for example, on YouTube or on social media, means that you are generating information that other people will consume. Therefore, you're a producer too. So everyone needs those new skills to make sure that you can navigate this Web 2.0 and participate in it as well. This main challenge that I talked about, the idea that everybody can come and participate into Web 2.0, has a name, and it's called folksonomy. And what's the problem about it? Why is this folksonomy creating so much misinformation? The reason behind that is that there is no more distinction between an expert on a certain topic and a non-expert. And because this distinction doesn't exist anymore, it makes it easy for people and producers of information to spread their opinions as values, identities, ideologies, as facts online. Another challenge from this rise of misinformation is that this new media is not simply shaping our culture, but it is our culture in itself. And so this constant flow of misinformation has a real impact on all of us. And of course, this is not a new phenomena. Each time we had a new media being introduced in our society, there was challenge arising from it. For example, when the TV and the radio were introduced in the 20th century, there was challenges connected to it as well. People had to understand how to interact with this new media and trying to understand the impact that it has on our society. And it might sound weird from our perspective today, but with the introduction of radio and TV, there was a lot of critics on the impact that it can have, for example, on our kids, on children, and people in general in the society. The big challenge from Web 2.0 compared to the traditional media such as radio or TV is that it has been introduced way faster than it had in the past with traditional media. And also, it is widespread, meaning it's not simply a specific country or social class that now has access to it, it is everybody globally. And that means that when misinformation comes into this system, it is spreading faster than ever. On top of that, algorithms on social media are actually boosting those posts and information which generates engagement. And those ones are more often than not misleading stories or sensational stories that really have an impact on our emotions. Finally, misinformation also thrives on echo chambers, which reduce the number of sources that people are going to check and also creates these extreme views. I've made a dedicated video on echo chambers, so check that out if you want to understand how they are created and how can we avoid falling in one. And of course, the consequences and the impact of misinformation is huge because it is available globally. People are not yet fully educated to try to understand what is real information and what is fake information. And the politics, governments, and interested parties are sometimes using this for their own benefits. What is exactly media literacy? Why is it so important? Long ago, we had to learn how to read because otherwise we would be excluded from society because we couldn't read newspapers, books, and try to participate in this environment. Media literacy is the next logical step to take once we know how to read certain type of content. And it goes further because it asks us to understand what the text is talking about, to be able to critically assess it, and to understand also the underlying reasons why this text is being presented, and trying to identify if there is hidden agenda, for example, from the producer. Just as learning how to read, it allows us to make informed decisions and to participate in our society. Scholars are still investigating how best to interact with this new media, but they already drafted some frameworks that are extremely important to look at so that we understand how to act. Most of the content of this video comes from an academic paper called Understanding New Media Literacy. And this is where you can find the framework that we will look at right now. I will link the paper in the description so you can check it out as well. By having a grasp of the information on this framework, you'll be able to better navigate this digital landscape and also becoming a better producer of information by being mindful on the impact that it has on culture in general. So let's look at the framework together. So this framework has two different axes. On the horizontal axis, we can see the divide between consuming content, meaning when you go online and you see content from others, or producing content from your own, which will be called in this framework prosuming. And then we have the vertical axis, where we're looking at the different skills which are necessary in order to navigate safely online. And those skills are divided into two main categories. On one side, we have the functional skills, which are simply how to access this content, how to navigate online, and then the critical skills, which go further on how to analyze, synthesize, and evaluate the information available, and also in the producing side or prosuming, how to create content responsibly. And so those two axes, they really create this balance that helps to develop our literacy in new media. Just as learning how to read and understand text allows you to navigate those books and information, we have the skills which are used to be able to understand and critically engage with the content that you see online. And the strength of this framework is its practicality, because we often think about this abstract concept of, oh yeah, we need to be literate, we need to understand and challenge the content that we're seeing, but it doesn't tell us which skills do we actually need, which actions do we need to take in order to get better at critically engaging with this information. So with that in mind, let's check each steps of this framework to have a clear idea on what do we need to do in order to critically engage online. And we'll start with consuming media. And the goal here is to try to be able to find and identify relevant information while being able to filter out the misinformation to ensure that we are engaging with information which is reliable. An example of it could be that there is a news outlet that states that we made a groundbreaking scientific discovery. And rather than taking it simply at face value, we will try to challenge this information. We will try to find other outlets which are sharing the same content to try to understand the reliability of this information. And to help us out, there are fact-checking tools that are now widely available online, such as Snopes or PolitiFact, for example. By using those tools and at the same time checking for other sources, credible sources that are relaying this information, we are able to ensure that it's reliable. And that brings us to the second skill necessary for consuming information online, which is understanding. What we mean here is that messages that we read are most often not literal statements. They often have a surface level and a deeper level of meaning. And so we need to be able to understand what is the context in which they are being propagated and how should we understand them. And you could be simply navigating online and see a tweet of someone saying, AI doesn't sleep, it doesn't forget, who's really in control? And at face value, it's a very fair question because there's a lot of developments in AI currently and the impacts of AI have not really been clearly identified at this point, so we can ask ourselves those questions. However, when it's phrased in this way online, and we can see, for example, different emojis that are added to the message, the context becomes extremely important. For example, the sinking emoji invites some kind of skepticism and a critique of the authority in this context at least. And by using these emojis, for example, the meaning of the message is not 100% clear. It is ambiguous. And it could be that the author of this tweet made it on purpose because online, the debates that are taking place are thriving on this lack of clarity. When it's not exactly clear what the person means, then it leaves a lot on interpretation. And so when the message is not clear, people can use this message, interpret it as they want, and try to push their own agenda. Which leads us directly to the next skill required when consuming new media, which is analysis, or how to deconstruct the media to better understand it. As I just said, the information online is not just laying around with no purpose. When someone decided to create the content, they had an idea in mind, they had an intent. And analyzing media means breaking it down to understand who is behind this message, for which purpose, and especially to whom are they trying to communicate. And the format of the media is also extremely important. So for example, when next time you're seeing a political ad online, try to identify the words that they're using, because it could be that they used very strongly emotional words to try to push you to a certain direction. Or maybe they're using strong visuals that is trying to impact the comprehension that you have of the message, or dramatic music to manage to bring again those emotions and push you in the direction where they want you to go. In short, when you see a message online, try to understand how it's designed and for which purpose. What is the opinion that they're trying to influence? And once you're clear on the analysis of the message, we can look at the next step, which is the synthesis. And here we are talking about comparing sources. And so you need to do the previous steps for all the information that you find on a specific topic. You need to understand who's the author, what's the intent, how do they communicate this message. And then with all the different sources that you have, you can combine them together to try to make this synthesis. And once you have them all together, this is where you can form your own opinion when you are clear on the different pros and cons from each side, and you try to bring your own mark on this information. In practice, that means that you may research climate change topics. And so you will take information from news outlets, from maybe social media and certain influencers. You collect all this information. You're trying to analyze what might be the biases that are into each message and what's the intent of each author. And then you put them all together and you try to identify where there is contradictions, where the different authors do not align, and where there is a certain pattern that you're trying to identify. And if all the sources agree on a certain pattern, it seems that this information might be more reliable than the information which is just relayed by one person, for example. And the last step in the consuming part of this framework is evaluation. In this step, the goal is to try to understand if a specific source that you identified is actually credible. And this is based on a lot of content that you're evaluating from them, and you understand if actually you can trust this source or not. And this is where there is really a decision process where you will define in your media landscape which sources you can trust and which you cannot. And what is interesting is that usually people go the other way around. They hear that a certain outlet, news outlet, for example, is trustworthy, and then they go and they look at this information. Here we are going on the other way around of trying to find information online, and I critically assess it, trying to understand the messages behind, and then after that we can evaluate if the sources is actually credible or not, based on the work that we've been putting before. Also, what is super interesting about the framework is that we're not saying that one type of information is true and the other is false. We are really questioning and realizing that all messages that are available are human constructed. And that means that they have an agenda behind, there is an intent, and it is not only that one outlet is saying the truth and the other one is saying something false, but rather that each of them have a specific agenda and they're trying to influence the opinion of the readers, and we need to be strong enough to develop the skills to evaluate it. And when I'm saying that they have an agenda, I don't mean that they're all demons trying to convince us to do bad stuff, but simply that there is a reason why this article is here. And as we've seen in previous videos, they're looking for engagement, and there is a reason why certain tactics works better than other. And so for us to make sure that the information is actually insightful and relevant for us in our specific scenario, well, we need to be able to critically assess it. And one part of it is to understand that they are humans writing content or creating content, and that there is a purpose in their actions. And now let's dive into the prosuming side of this framework. As we've seen, most of us are not only consumers, but also producers of specific content. And that means that we are sharing posts that people share with us online, we are interacting or debating on the comment section or in forums, or we even create our own content. And so since we take part in this discussion, there are some ethical considerations that we need to take into account. And one of them is simply, am I adding value when I'm sharing specific content, or am I spreading misinformation? And with this prosuming section, we will basically do the same as we're doing in the consumer section, but on the other side. That means that before you're sharing any type of content online, check some other sources, at least 2 sources that say the same thing before you start also pushing it on your side. And those sources hopefully are credible. Another tip is simply to avoid spreading emotional content without checking it. And that's something that many people do. You see something very shocking online and you cannot hold it anymore. You have these emotions, and so you just click and you repost it so that everybody can be informed. But as we've seen, emotional content are designed in this way so that you're doing this. So by simply following your instinct there, you're spreading information which might not be true at all. And when you engage with a discussion online, try to promote understanding rather than division. The next skill is the production and creation of content. And what is important here is to realize that creating content is not only about entertainment. It's rather also about inspiration and trying to develop understanding of a specific topic and bringing insights. The challenge is that many people are trying to create entertaining content. And as we've seen, content which is entertaining might be perceived as facts and information to people that look at it without any credibility behind. And when that happens, this is when you're actually spreading misinformation on your side. And that is extremely important for me on this channel as well, and for every creator out there. The goal for me is to try to promote critical thinking and becoming better at having these deep conversations. And I can only do that when I also put myself into question and ensure that the information that I'm sharing is credible, that I checked it, and that I'm trying to promote understanding rather than division. And that is it for this framework. So to sum it up, what is extremely interesting in this one is that we cannot just believe that we can go online becoming consumer and producers without any skills. It is not something that we should just take for granted, that there is this environment when everybody can exchange, we can create content, and it's all gonna be fine. Rather, we need to understand that we have a responsibility, and many people are not living to the standards that is expected currently online. So by going through this framework and trying to understand the exact skills that we need to develop for better conversations, we're able to become a better consumer. We're not being tricked by any kind of emotional video that is spread online. And also on the other side, we become better producer. And so when we want to put an hateful comment on a video or to repost information that we've seen and are very challenging for us emotionally, then we need to think twice about clicking on the button and sending it out. And so of course there is a lot of misinformation out there, and there is a lot of people that won't have the skills necessary to have meaningful discussions online. And there are people that also have a bad intent and want to create this misinformation and those echo chambers for their own purposes. But that doesn't mean that we cannot influence it ourselves, because we need to develop those skills to ensure that we can drive this whole project in the right direction. So we have a chance to turn this whole internet thing into a space for truth and meaningful conversation rather than simply using it as a tool for division and hate. And so on your side, what are strategies that help you navigate misinformation online? And how do you distinguish between trustworthy and untrustworthy sources when consuming media? Additionally, have you ever considered how your own values and ideology might influence the media you produce or share? One additional challenge that we didn't discuss in this video is that many reliable sources are actually very challenging to understand. For example, academic papers or studies are very cryptic, and even if we come with a good intention, we might get discouraged along the way when we're trying to read through them. And that is exactly what we're going to do in the next video, where we will see a practical method that will allow you to engage critically with this text, understand the content, and hopefully extract insightful materials from them. See you on the next one.